Steve Harvey had been hosting Family Feud for nearly 2 decades, and he thought he had developed the emotional resilience to handle virtually any situation that arose on stage. He had witnessed confessions that shocked audiences, heard testimonies of sacrifice that moved millions to tears, and listened to stories that had challenged everything he thought he knew about grief, resilience, and the human capacity to endure the unendurable. But on that rainy April afternoon in 2026, the Morrison family from Oregon would reveal a tragedy so devastating, so profoundly heartbreaking in its scope and in the way they had silently carried it for 3 years, that Steve would be unable to stop crying, not just tearing up but openly weeping, his shoulders shaking, having to pause multiple times to compose himself, while everyone in the studio witnessed a family sharing a grief so enormous that it seemed impossible they were still standing, still functioning, still able to smile even as they revealed what they had lost. 2 families stood ready to compete, the Richardson family from Florida and the Morrison family from Oregon. The Morrison family drew immediate attention because there was something both luminous and heartbreaking about them. A quality of people who had survived something terrible and were now radiating both profound sadness and unexpected joy. At the center stood Patricia Morrison, a woman in her early 50s with prematurely gray hair and eyes that held infinite sorrow alongside fierce determination. Beside her stood her husband James, also in his early 50s, and 3 children who looked to be in their late teens and early 20s. But there was something unusual about the group composition. The 3 young people didn't quite look like biological siblings, and their interactions suggested complicated relationships. And Patricia wore a gold pin on her collar in the shape of 3 interlinked hearts. During the pre-interview, Patricia had been composed, but clearly carrying something heavy. When asked about her family, she had said something that seemed cryptic, but would later reveal devastating meaning. "Our family doesn't look like what people expect, and that's because 3 years ago, our family was torn apart and then rebuilt in a way we never could have imagined. We're here today because we want to honor what we lost and celebrate what we've gained, and because we think our story might help other families who are living through similar tragedy. But I need Steve Harvey to understand who's standing on his stage, because these 3 young people beside us aren't just our children. They're also a gift we received from unspeakable loss." Patricia's husband James, when asked to clarify what Patricia meant, had spoken with obvious emotion barely controlled, saying, "3 years ago in 2023, we experienced a tragedy that should have destroyed our family. Instead, through circumstances we still don't fully understand, that tragedy led to something unexpected and beautiful. But Patricia wants to tell Steve directly, on camera, because our story is complicated and painful and also somehow hopeful, and she wants to honor all of it, the loss and what came after." The Morrison family won their game with quiet efficiency, the 3 young people playing with intense focus and Patricia and James contributing answers while exchanging meaningful glances. As they lined up for fast money, Patricia stepped forward immediately and said, "Mr. Harvey, before we play anything else, I need to tell you about our family. I need to tell you who these young people are and why they're standing here with us, and I need to tell you about the 3 children we lost who should be here but aren't." Steve's expression shifted immediately to one of serious concern, and he said gently, "Mrs. Morrison, tell me what I need to know." The studio fell into a heavy silence. Patricia took a deep breath, and tears were already streaming down her face as she said, 3 years ago, in May 2023, my 3 children, Rachel, who was 22, Daniel, who was 19, and Emma, who was 16, were killed in a car accident. A drunk driver ran a red light and hit their car broadside. All 3 of them died instantly. They were my whole world, Mr. Harvey. My entire life was built around being their mother, and in one moment, because of someone else's choice to drive drunk, they were gone. The studio erupted in gasps and cries, and Steve's face showed immediate devastation. His eyes filled with tears, and he said, "Oh no. Oh, Mrs. Morrison, I am so sorry." Patricia nodded, barely able to continue but forcing herself to go on. She said, "Rachel was in college, studying to be a teacher. Daniel was in his 2nd year of college, majoring in engineering. Emma was a junior in high school, on the honor roll, planning to study medicine. They were good kids, Mr. Harvey. Kind, smart, funny, full of life and plans and dreams. And they died together, in an instant, and James and I were left trying to figure out how to continue living when our entire reason for living was gone. James put his arm around Patricia as she continued. The first year after the accident was unbearable. I couldn't function. I couldn't get out of bed most days. I was on medication for depression and anxiety. James and I nearly divorced because we were grieving so differently and couldn't help each other. We were drowning in grief, and I honestly didn't think we would survive it. I didn't want to survive it. I wanted to die and be with my children. The only thing that kept me alive was that I was too much of a coward to actively kill myself, so I just existed, barely waiting for the grief to kill me naturally. Steve was crying now, visibly struggling to maintain composure, and the audience was collectively devastated. Patricia gestured to the 3 young people standing beside her and said, "But then, 14 months after the accident, in July 2024, something happened that changed everything. The drunk driver who killed our children, his name was Michael Porter, and he was 38 years old. He was convicted of vehicular manslaughter and sentenced to 20 years in prison. And after he was sentenced, his wife contacted us. Her name is Jennifer Porter, and she wanted to meet with us to apologize on behalf of her husband." Patricia's voice grew stronger, driven by the need to tell this story fully. She said, "We didn't want to meet with her at first. What could she possibly say that would matter? Her husband had killed our children, but she was persistent, and finally James and I agreed to meet with her. And when we met, Jennifer told us something that made our tragedy even more complicated. She told us that Michael had been an alcoholic for years, that she had begged him to get help, that the night he killed our children, he had promised her he wasn't going to drink and drive, and then she told us that she had 3 children, Emma, age 15, Lucas, age 13, and Sophie, age 11. And she told us that, with Michael in prison for 20 years, she couldn't afford to care for all 3 children on her own. She was going to lose her house, she couldn't work enough hours to support them, and she was facing the possibility that her children would have to go into foster care. The studio remained in absolute silence, everyone transfixed by where this story was going. Patricia said, "Jennifer wasn't asking us for money. She wasn't asking us for anything. She just wanted us to know that our tragedy had rippled outward, that her children were also victims of her husband's choices, and that she was sorry, not just for what her husband had done to our family, but for the fact that her family was also being destroyed by his actions." And then she left, and James and I went home, and we had a conversation that changed our lives. Patricia turned to the 3 young people beside her and said, "Emma, Lucas, and Sophie, these are Jennifer Porter's children. 15 months ago, after meeting their mother and learning about their situation, James and I made a decision that most people thought was insane. We invited Jennifer and her 3 children to move in with us. We told her we would help her financially, help her keep her children together, help them through this impossible situation. And over the past 15 months, something unexpected happened. These 3 children, who lost their father to prison because he killed our 3 children, became part of our family. Not replacements, we're very clear about that, but additional. Different. Complicated, but real." Steve stood frozen, his face showing complete shock and disbelief, tears streaming down his face uncontrollably. He tried to speak but couldn't form words. Patricia continued, "Emma Porter is now 17, the same age our Emma was when she died. Lucas is 14, Sophie is 12. Their mother Jennifer works 2 jobs and lives in an apartment nearby, but the kids spend most of their time at our house because we have the room and the resources, and because somehow, impossibly, we've all needed each other. James and I needed a reason to keep living, needed someone to care for, needed to feel like parents again, and Emma, Lucas, and Sophie needed stability and support and adults who could help them navigate having a father in prison for killing 3 people. Emma Porter, the 17-year-old, stepped forward with tears in her eyes and said, "Mr. Harvey, I need you to understand how complicated this is. My father killed the Morrisons' 3 children. He took away their daughter Emma, who I'm named after coincidentally. He destroyed their family. And somehow Mrs. Morrison and Mr. Morrison have welcomed me and my brother and sister into their home and their lives. They've helped my mom financially, they've tutored us, they've come to our school events. They've treated us with kindness even though we're the children of the man who killed their children. I don't understand how they can do that, but I'm grateful every single day. Lucas, the 14-year-old, said, "My dad made a terrible choice that killed 3 people and sent him to prison. I'm angry at him for that, and I'm ashamed of what he did. But Mr. and Mrs. Morrison have shown me that people aren't just the worst thing they've done, and that healing sometimes looks different than you expect. They've given my family hope when we had none, and they've shown us grace we don't deserve." Patricia said, "I need to be clear about something. These children are not replacements for Rachel, Daniel, and Emma. Nothing can replace my children, and I will grieve their loss for the rest of my life. But having Emma, Lucas, and Sophie in our lives has given James and me a reason to keep living. It's given us purpose again. It's reminded us that we're capable of love and care even in the midst of devastating grief. And it's shown us that sometimes healing comes from the most unexpected places." James spoke for the first time, his voice thick with emotion. He said, "When Patricia first suggested that we help Jennifer and her kids, I thought she was crazy. I was so angry at Michael Porter for killing our children that the idea of helping his family seemed impossible. But Patricia convinced me to at least meet them, and when I met these 3 kids, I saw children who were suffering because of their father's choices, children who needed help, children who reminded me of my own kids at those ages, and I realized that punishing them for what their father did wouldn't bring my children back, but helping them might give my grief some purpose." Steve finally found his voice, though he was still crying openly, unable to stop. He said, "Let me make sure I understand this. Your 3 children, Rachel, Daniel, and Emma, were killed by a drunk driver 3 years ago. That driver, Michael Porter, went to prison, and you, instead of hating his family, invited his wife and 3 children into your lives and have been helping them for the past 15 months. You've essentially adopted the children of the man who killed your children. I don't even have words for what that is. That's the most profound act of grace and forgiveness I've ever heard." Patricia shook her head and said, "It's not forgiveness, Mr. Harvey. I haven't forgiven Michael Porter for what he did. I don't know if I ever will. He took my babies from me, and that's something I'll carry forever. But his children didn't kill my children. He did, and his children are suffering just like we're suffering. So this isn't about forgiving him. It's about choosing not to let his terrible choice destroy even more lives. It's about recognizing that Emma, Lucas, and Sophie are innocent victims of their father's actions, just like Rachel, Daniel, and Emma were innocent victims. And it's about finding a way to keep living when you don't want to live anymore, and sometimes that means caring for people who need you even when you're broken yourself." Steve had to step away from the stage for a moment, his crying making it impossible to continue. When he returned several minutes later, his face was red and wet with tears, and he said, I literally cannot, stop crying. What you have shared is the most heartbreaking and the most beautiful thing I have ever heard on this show. You lost your 3 children to a drunk driver. You were drowning in grief, and instead of staying in that grief alone, instead of hating the driver's family, you opened your home and your hearts to his 3 children and helped them survive the consequences of their father's choices. That's not just grace. That's supernatural. That's something I don't even understand how human beings can do." He turned to the camera and said through his tears, "Ladies and gentlemen, the Morrison family lost their 3 children, Rachel, Daniel, and Emma, in a drunk driving accident 3 years ago. And these 3 young people standing with them, Emma, Lucas, and Sophie Porter, are the children of the drunk driver who killed the Morrison children. And the Morrisons have taken them in, have helped them, have given them stability and support and love despite the unfathomable pain of their loss. I don't even have words. This is the most profound example of choosing love over hate, of choosing to help rather than to punish, of choosing to keep living and caring even when grief makes you want to die." Steve said, "We're not playing fast money. We're giving the Morrison family the full $20,000, and we're going to establish a fund in memory of Rachel, Daniel, and Emma Morrison to help families affected by drunk driving. What you've done, what you're doing, is showing the world that even in the face of unbearable tragedy, even when someone takes everything from you, you can choose to respond with grace instead of bitterness. I don't know how you do it, but I'm grateful you're showing us it's possible. The episode that aired became one of the most watched and emotionally powerful programs in television history, with over 140 million viewers worldwide. The story of the Morrison family losing their 3 children to a drunk driver and then taking in the driver's 3 children went viral immediately, sparking intense conversations about forgiveness, grace, victim support, and how we handle situations where perpetrators of harm have families who are also hurt by their actions. The response was deeply divided. Some viewers praised the Morrisons as examples of extraordinary grace and compassion, viewing their choice to help the Porter children as heroic and inspiring. Others questioned whether the Morrisons were betraying their deceased children's memory by helping the family of their killer, or whether they were engaging in unhealthy grief processing by essentially replacing their children with the children of the man who killed them. Mental health professionals and grief counselors used the Morrison family's story to discuss complicated grief, noting that Patricia and James had been clear that the Porter children weren't replacements for their deceased children, but rather a way of finding purpose and meaning in the aftermath of devastating loss. Many therapists noted that helping others can be a legitimate and healthy way to process grief, though they cautioned that it needs to be done with professional support and clear boundaries. Organizations focused on drunk driving prevention and victim support embraced the Morrison family's story as a powerful example of how one drunk driving incident creates multiple layers of victims. Not just those killed or injured, but also their families, the driver's family, and entire communities. Many used the Morrisons' choice to help the Porter children as an example of restorative justice principles, focusing on healing and repair rather than purely punitive responses. The Morrison and Porter families continued their unusual arrangement. Jennifer Porter remained grateful for the Morrisons' support while acknowledging the complexity and pain of the situation. The Porter children continued to spend significant time with the Morrisons, who helped with homework, attended school events, and provided stability while Jennifer worked. The relationship was described by all involved as complicated, often difficult, sometimes awkward, but also meaningful and healing in unexpected ways. Michael Porter, serving his 20-year sentence, wrote a letter from prison that the Morrisons shared publicly with his permission. In it, he said, "I killed 3 innocent people, Rachel, Daniel, and Emma Morrison, because I made the selfish, evil choice to drive drunk. Nothing I say can undo that or make it right. I deserve to be in prison, and I deserve whatever hatred the Morrisons feel toward me. But I've learned that the Morrisons have welcomed my children into their home and have been helping them while I'm incarcerated. I don't understand how they can do that. I don't understand how they can show such kindness to the family of the man who destroyed their family. But I'm grateful beyond words, and I hope that in some small way, the fact that they're caring for my children when I can't provides them some measure of meaning in the midst of their grief. My children are good kids who don't deserve to suffer for my mistakes, and the Morrisons are showing them grace that I don't deserve and that most people wouldn't show. That's something I'll think about every day for the rest of my life." Patricia Morrison became a speaker at grief support events and at drunk driving prevention programs, always telling the full story: the devastating loss, the unbearable grief, the anger at Michael Porter, and the unexpected healing that came from helping his children. She was always clear that she wasn't advocating that everyone in similar situations should do what she and James did, but rather that healing can come from unexpected places, and that sometimes choosing to help someone else, even someone connected to your pain, can provide purpose when grief threatens to destroy you. In interviews, Patricia said, "People ask me how I can help the children of the man who killed my children. The answer is complicated. I haven't forgiven Michael Porter. I don't know if I ever will. What he did is unforgivable. But his children didn't kill my children. They're innocent victims of their father's terrible choice, just like my children were innocent victims. And I was drowning in grief, unable to function, wanting to die. And then these 3 kids needed help, needed stability, needed adults who could care for them while their mother worked 3 jobs and their father sat in prison. And somehow, caring for them gave me a reason to get out of bed. It gave me purpose. It reminded me that I'm still capable of love and care even when I'm broken. It's not about replacing my children. Nothing can do that. It's about finding a way to keep living that honors their memory by choosing love and care over bitterness and isolation. The story of the Morrison family and their hidden tragedy, and the unexpected way they found healing by helping the family of the man who caused that tragedy, became a powerful testimony about grief, grace, complicated mercy, and the human capacity to choose compassion even in the face of unbearable loss. It challenged simple narratives about victims and perpetrators by showing that perpetrators have families who also suffer, and that sometimes helping those secondary victims can be a path toward healing for primary victims. It raised difficult questions about forgiveness, justice, and what we owe to the innocent family members of people who caused terrible harm. But perhaps most significantly, the Morrison family's story became a reminder that healing from profound loss doesn't follow a prescribed path, that sometimes the most unexpected choices lead to the most meaningful healing, and that we're capable of far more grace and compassion than we think we are, even when we're shattered by grief. As Patricia said in her final interview about the experience, "I lost my 3 children, Rachel, Daniel, and Emma, to a drunk driver. That loss will never stop hurting. I will grieve them for the rest of my life. But 3 years later, I'm still here, still functioning, still finding moments of joy, and a large part of that is because I'm helping Emma, Lucas, and Sophie Porter, the children of the man who killed my children." That sounds impossible, and most days it still feels impossible. But it's also real, and it's also healing, and it's shown me that even in the darkest grief, even when someone takes everything from you, you can still choose to be a source of light and help for someone else who needs it. That choice doesn't undo my loss, but it gives my continued living a purpose. And when you've lost your reason for living, having any purpose at all is a gift.